Can I reduce the sugar in a cookie recipe? This is one of the most common questions that I'm asked. So today I wanted to clear this up for you. I made the same cookie 4 different times with 4 different amounts of sugar. I made the recipe as written with 100% sugar. Then I also made it with 75% of the sugar, so a 25% reduction and a 50% reduction of sugar. Then, just for comparison, we did a 150% version where we used 50% more sugar than the recipe called for. Many people think that if you reduce the sugar, all you're going to change is the sweetness, but sugar actually does a lot more than that. Sugar can completely change how much a cookie spreads, how much it browns, and even how soft it stays. So this was the same recipe, same flour, same butter, same oven. The only thing we changed was the sugar. Now, the sneaky thing we realized is you can't always tell the difference you're making before you bake the dough. We made this dough 4 times, and every time it actually looked pretty similar. Our 50% dough was slightly more dry, but it really wasn't super noticeable. And our 150% dough was slightly more sticky, but overall they actually felt pretty much the same when we were scooping and rolling them. But while sugar is physically dry when we're using it in our dough, it's technically a wet ingredient because it behaves like a wet ingredient when it's being baked. It dissolves, it melts, it's also going to caramelize, which is going to give you a different amount of browning, and it retains moisture. So this is our perfect control cookie. If you ask me, it has the perfect amount of spread, it's the perfect amount of browning, and if you break into it, it's the perfect amount of bend to it. You know this cookie is going to be just chewy enough and it's going to stay soft for several days. It's not going to be dry and crumbly the next day after you bake it. Now here's what happens when we reduce the sugar by 25%. The difference isn't super drastic and super obvious, but if you look closely, you can see this cookie is less brown. It didn't spread quite as much. And let's go ahead and break into it. It still has that softness to it, but it's going to be more dry and crumbly the next day. It's not going to stay soft as long. A lot of gourmet cookies, including some of the ones I've made, will use a lower ratio of sugar in order to keep the cookies thicker. That way they don't spread as much. However, usually when a recipe is designed to use less sugar, we're doing other things to keep the crumb nice and tender and soft. So keep that in mind. All right, here's our 50%, and this one I really don't recommend unless you're going for a specific taste. This cookie is way more pale, so we didn't have that Maillard reaction happening quite as much because there's not as much sugar, so not nearly as brown, and it just didn't spread very much. Let's go ahead and break into this guy. Oh, and okay, it's crumbling into my sugar because it's just a more crumbly one. Definitely going to be less sweet, it'll have less flavor, and it's not going to stay soft for as long as its sister cookies. It doesn't look terrible. It's not even going to taste terrible, but it's kind of more on the biscuit side of things than the cookie side of things. Okay, now this one was for fun. I increased the sugar by 50% to see what happened here. And as you can see, the cookies spread way more. They also came out a lot more brown. Again, that's the Maillard reaction. The sugar is caramelizing while the cookies are baking, and there was a lot of it. Despite the browning, the centers actually also look underdone a bit. It's just more difficult to completely bake the cookie all the way through. If you were to bake it so that the centers don't look underdone like that, the whole cookie would be pretty dark and pretty brown and pretty crispy. However, when they're baked perfectly like this, they're usually pretty bendy, and the flavor of this cookie almost borders a little bit more on a candy, like a slightly caramel candy flavor. It's a lot sweeter. And you can just see how thin that is thanks to all the sugar. Let's compare that to our 50%, huge difference. But let's also just compare that to our 100%. Less sugar, less browning, less caramelization. With the recipe as written, we have tender and chewy and balanced. With the 25% reduction, not quite as tender and chewy, but still passable as a chocolate chip cookie, but 50% you lose that tenderness. You have a different, very dry softness that's, again, more biscuity. You lose that chocolate chip cookie chew. Sugar holds moisture, so it helps keep the cookies tender and soft, and it will do this for several days. Reduce the sugar too much, the cookies are dry and they stale faster. So how much can you safely reduce sugar in your cookie recipe? A 10 to 15% reduction will usually be fine. Once you get to 25%, it's a little bit noticeable, but the cookies are still going to be pretty good. 50%, you're changing moisture, structure, browning. You should really know what you're getting yourself into if you take this route. And increasing your sugar, you're going to get more spread, more browning, more moisture, but your cookies might look a little bit crazy and could be too sweet for some people. Sugar isn't just sweetness, it is texture, structure, and balance. So if you're adjusting it in your own cookie recipes, now you know what to expect. I hope this was helpful, and if you want the original recipe that we use to test these cookies, it is my best chocolate chip cookie recipe, and I will link it in the description. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you found this to be helpful, and I will see you next time. This one's my favorite.
I'm sorry. There's a paper towel sticking out of that trash can.
I changed one thing in this sugar. That doesn't make sense. So sugar. chef. And it's not going to say stick the distant, and I really, okay, good catch, good catch.